Hello everybody and welcome back to more unfiltered opinions on how the general public is being sacrificed on the altar of progressive ideology. Now it's often reported in the mainstream news about patient safety, issues in the number of doctors and nurses, a lack of funding, etc., etc. But they never seem to be willing to speak about the elephant in the room, which is the mass migration that is pushing this demand for ever further requirement for more medical professionals. They also never mention as well how disproportionately foreign trained doctors are to be struck off, and the cost to the NHS in court costs and compensation for the blundering of those doctors. I believe the majority of doctors struck off is for sexual impropriety as well, so general noncery, so to speak, which I have reported on quite a few on one of those quite recently. I'll put the link in below. But there has also been in recent issue of foreign trained nurses, in particular, being from Nigeria, believed to have acquired their nursing diplomas in a fraudulent manner. There's a total of about 717 being investigated for getting someone else to sit a computer based online competency exam in Nigeria. I do believe that this has also been in one very specific area. So it's most likely coming from one very specific tribe in Nigeria as well. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole right now, but there is obviously a very big thing in Nigeria about tribes and how different groups conduct themselves and etc. etc. 80 so far have been investigated, with the majority of them being found to have been unsuitable. All of those, and this is the most worrying part, all of those still being investigated are still performing their duties. Now, in my opinion, this is gross negligence, incredibly dangerous. And I do think that people do need sacking for this because they are putting the general public's safety in danger. This is also a problem with hiring from abroad, where countries have far less rigorous systems, and it's also socially acceptable for corruption to take place. Obviously, when you get to much poorer countries, corruption is just seen as part and parcel of the day, even going as far as for corruption to actually be expected, especially when it comes to engaging in business. People won't think twice about bribing, and they'll actually look at you as being weird and strange if you don't offer a bribe, and they may even suspect you of it being up to something yourself if you're not trying to bribe them, as strange as that sounds. And I think it's to a lesser extent, it's very easy to see actually. If you watch football, I don't, but obviously I know people who do. But if you watch Northern European versus Southern European football, you can see the difference in how the game's played. And I like to use this quite a lot because in Northern European countries, you tend to find that taking a dive is incredibly frowned upon, and in fact, players will get punished by their own teams for it. Whereas in Southern European football, taking a dive and getting away with it is seen as a good thing, with clubs actually engaging in training the players how to take dives properly to try and get away with it. And it's just that difference in mindset, and that's somewhere as close civilizationally as Europe. And the further away you get, the more the civilization and the cultures change of what's normal and what's not normal. That's just the way the world is. People in the West just don't seem to actually get that. But anyway, as I say, widespread corruption is unfortunately in most countries around the world, especially once you get outside of the West, and where real poverty, and I don't mean like what European people, what we call poverty in the UK, which is, all right, somebody not being able to, not being able to pay the bills properly and stuff like that, but they've still got electricity, they've still got running water, they've still got food, they've still got a roof over their head. That's, if you go to to many African countries, that would be considered doing well. By poverty, I mean people literally living in squalor, literally living in their own filth with an open sewer outside the front door, where all they have is literally four walls and a tin roof, and a bed made out of plywood or something, whatever they've managed to scrounge together, and they're cooking on an open fire. There was about 10 of them living in that room, in that single room. That's actual poverty around the world, and where starvation is also not uncommon for those people. Now that situation is bad enough, but it's at the very least it's getting looked into. That has to be said, So hats off to the people who are actually looking into that, and hopefully all those guilty of the fraud will also be removed from the positions, and I hope they do, because I would hate to be a patient who gets treated by somebody who actually doesn't know what they're doing, and they've paid somebody else to sit an online computer exam for them, so they've been able to get a job over here. Personally, I do believe that this is a simply a consequence of failing to not only train enough nurses in the country, but also in retention. They really should be looking into making nursing and an apprenticeship, in my opinion, so there's no debt, because I do think when you hear about these young nurses talking about how they're in debt and they don't earn enough money. Well, if you get rid of the debt, they don't have to take out the loan. That's in effect, I don't know, let's say they're paying £200 a month to pay off that debt, to service that debt. Well, you've just given them a £200 a month pay rise there by them not having the debt, haven't you, in effect? But you could also turn around if they're doing an apprenticeship and say, well, look, we're paying for your training here. We want to return a service. So, maybe say to them 4 years return a service or something like that. So you could be looking at 4 years of training with 4 further years return a service. You've got somebody there for at least 8 years. And once they're settled in the job, they're very more than likely going to stay in the job as well, in the country. Now, this next example, though, is going to be even worse. And this is that the government is currently in discussions about removing the exam for foreign dentists applying to work here. Now, you might say, what could possibly go wrong in that situation? And this all comes down to, but this whole situation comes down to really how NHS dentists are paid, and how much they're paid to take on NHS staff. Because I believe a lot of dentists work privately, so they get paid by the NHS but I believe they get paid less for what they're actually doing. So it is an issue of funding. But I do believe this acts as it's acting like as a canary in the coal mine, because it's showing just how underfunded our systems are. It's not because the NHS isn't getting funded enough. It's a lot of it's down to the management, but I think it's also showing how the UK as well is also starting to go into the death throes of a failed state, almost, where we can't even properly fund things anymore, because we've got so much vanity projects on the go. We're actually bleeding the country to death through philanthropy. But I guess we've got to give Ukraine a couple of billion, haven't we? And I suppose we need, I suppose we've got to pay India for their space program, haven't we? And we've got to send China money as well. Those are real things that we actually do, by the way. Two of the wealthiest countries in the world, and we send them foreign aid. Crazy, can't make it up, but we actually do. So why invest money into our own country and into our own people when we can give it away to the rest of the world? And then we're also like in London, where about 47% of all social housing is occupied by people of foreign descent. Again, why spend money on our own country when we can just bring the rest of the world poor here, and we can pay for them to live in social housing and then pay for all their NHS care, thus piling on more and more debt onto the working people of this country. But what do I know? Now, there might be some people as well who could be thinking, well, what's the problem with unvetted dentists? It's only a few teeth that might get pulled out by accident. Who's really in the big scheme of things, who's bothered about that? That'll happen a couple of times. They'll get struck off. Yeah, it sucks for that person, but it's just a couple of teeth. It's not the end of the world. Well, firstly, what if that's your teeth getting pulled out? I wouldn't be happy if I got a couple of my teeth needlessly pulled out or drilled or whatever. I got fillings that I didn't need. But secondly, and this is the more important part, what if they miss something important, like an abscess in your mouth, and then that abscess turns into blood sepsis, and that blood sepsis goes into your brain? Would you like that? I wouldn't. I don't want that. I don't think there's many people who want to get sepsis of the brain, but that is a real consequence of having an unqualified dentist. Now, I'm not saying that can't happen with a properly trained dentist, but there's a much, much smaller chance of it happening with a properly trained, properly qualified dentist than with somebody who hasn't been properly trained, who's just bought the dentistry diploma on the open market in whatever country they're from, which is very common in places like India and Pakistan, by the way. People literally do just turn up to university, don't do anything, and then just pay for the degree, because that's the expectation in a lot of these countries. You're paying for your degree, so you're expected to get your degree. It's just accepted. That's what happens in a lot of these places. Why do you think they've got such high numbers of people coming out with amazing results, and so many of them? Because they're just paying for them, and the universities just hand them out. They're not bothered. Like I say, corruption's normal in most places. But as well, again, this is also another one-off example. But again, let's not forget, in 2014 there was Dr. Laxman, and she trained in India. Now this is going on to gynecology and paediatricians here, and she was consultant paediatrician in Tayside NHS Foundation in Scotland at Dundee, and she decapitated a baby during labour. The baby was breech. The mother had only dilated about 4 centimetres, which, I'm not a doctor, but I know from experience of being a father of 4 children, 4 centimetres is nowhere near enough. Now, for those of you wondering, by the way, I'm not just saying Doctor. I'm not singling Doctor Laxman out because she's got a foreign sounding name, but it's because she is actually foreign. She trained in India. I believe she passed in 1999 and she came to the UK in 2004. Um, you know, but I know as a father of four children, just with my layman's understanding and experience, that 4 centimeters isn't even close to being enough for dilation. It's 10 centimeters is what it should be, but 8 centimeters really you could, because this baby was premature as well. So like 8 centimeters. Again, I could be wrong here because I'm not a doctor, but I do believe that 8 centimeters would be acceptable for a 25-week-old baby. But the baby was breech, and she went against, from what I've read, she went against all guidelines. Um, Other professionals have said that the baby should have been a cesarean section, and he had to do a cesarean section anyway to recover the baby's head, because the baby's head was left inside the mother. Absolutely terrible. She's still working, by the way. She wasn't struck off. 2018, she was cleared on what I believe to be just an obtuse technicality, and I do believe she was cleared because of the colour of her skin and because she's foreign. I do not believe that somebody trained in the UK would have got away with that, especially if they had a white complexion to the skin. That's my opinion. I have no evidence at all, by the way, to prove that. That is purely my own gut feeling, speculation. I cannot obviously prove that in any way, but I'm going to say it because I believe it to be true, especially a lot of the stuff I've mentioned in other videos about how people get treated in this country differently. Um, but it's just the way, I don't know. It's just the way it is. I guess it's just the way it is. But I just thought I'd raise that final point. These are the risks of bringing in foreign doctors. And the level of training that they receive in these other countries. And yeah, they may be able to jump through the hoops of being able to answer certain questions on the tests, but being competent, and I know this from working on in railway engineering, being qualified and being competent are not the same thing. And this is the problem. Yeah, they're bringing over qualified people, but are they competent to conduct the jobs that they're actually applying for? That's another issue. Maybe the training that they're receiving isn't competent training, although it is giving them a qualification. Anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. I've waffled on now for 12 minutes. I think that's long enough. Sorry if I've sounded a bit funny. I'm full of a cold at the moment. But if you found that informative, interesting, or any of that sort of stuff, please do like, subscribe, and definitely do put a comment below. I always like reading them, and I'll put links into everything as well in the description. Thank you. Bye bye.